Welcome to the Code of Entry podcast, where we cloud the issues with facts and help you upskill to stay on the digital edge. Here's your host, Greg, with the latest.
Hey team, Greg here with another Code of Entry podcast, joined by Keri. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Today we're going to talk about data literacy. So one of the things we talked about recently was introduction to computer programming. You have a peer topic there to an introduction to what is data. So it really goes into data literacy. And so we happen to have a subject matter expert sitting here in data. So Keri has her master's of science in data analytics.
Yeah.
And did this for a job for a while. But we're going to get her opinion on this topic, and I'll add some color commentary as we go. Keri?
Yeah. So today I was hoping to cover some of the topics related to data literacy, including other maybe key concepts that I think everybody can walk away with for utilizing data, focusing in on data-centric operations. What does it mean when you're going to have conversations with folks in the Department of Defense, and what does it mean to them? And then as you could look at the different pieces of understanding, really just looking at quality, what helps to drive, and how can you use all these different pieces of data. So really back and forth, it's data literacy. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to me? So what does it mean to me? Ability to use, read, understand, create things out of data with some sort of purpose and provide something back, whether it's information, knowledge, whatever it might be. But how do you learn all of these different key concepts at a more of a high level? And then how do you find the right teammates to be part of the team to solve these larger problems, whether it's on the engineering side, on the science side, on the data creation side, things like that. Yeah. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think near the end there, you hit it for me, talking about problems. And the first thing about data literacy, people are just like, oh, we're going to have a lot of data, so we need to be able to do data science. So the first thing is normally people don't have data, and they admire the problem, or like the problem generically, to where they don't even know what data they have. They don't know what data they want. They assume they have data, or they assume that it's too hard. And just take a step back and, okay, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? If you know what the problem you're trying to solve is, or what the questions you're trying to answer are, it's a lot easier to start walking towards, okay, what data do I need? Do I have it? Don't I have it? And let's just start collecting it. And then you can get down the road of, are we using the right standards? Do we have the right governance and all that? But a lot of that should be secondary. And I think in this data world, there are a lot of bad assumptions, and we have a lot of problem at Myers. You don't even start doing data work. And so you don't start collecting data. So you can't really use data to drive any decisions because you're still thinking about how you should do it.
Yes. You can learn a lot just by doing. If I would just think.
Learn by doing.
Learn
Paul
by doing.
Stanton.
Yes. So I think one of the key pieces when it comes to data is, as it relates to the problem, what is the scope and the focus of whatever you're trying to solve for this problem? Can you decompose it into something a little bit more finite, have a good methodology of getting after whatever it might be? So if the problem is so large, can you break it down into smaller pieces and then start tackling it like in different lines of effort? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of wicked problems. And in problem terminology, you have a problem, you have hard problems, you have complex problems, and then people are like, oh, you have wicked problems. And a wicked problem really just means you don't understand the problem and you're saying that it's too hard to solve. So somebody says, oh yeah, that's a wicked problem.
Not that they're from Boston?
Yeah, not that it's just wicked hard. But as soon as somebody says, oh, that's a really wicked problem, well, they just haven't thought about it. You haven't done any problem decomposition or anything. But yeah, as you start kind of thinking about, what are the key concepts here, it all starts with, okay, identifying the problem. And so your first thing in your data literacy isn't even anything to do with data. It's just basic problem solving, some basic systems engineering of what are you trying to solve? Because if you want to know how the weather is going to be tomorrow, when you say weather, are you worried about the temperature? Or are you worried about precipitation? Because if you're worried about temperature, then you need to record the temperature. Is it going to be hot or is it going to be cold? If you're worried about precipitation, maybe it's trends of barometric pressures, something that would be a better indicator. But until you can really get after what are you trying to answer and what's the intent behind it, the data part doesn't really matter because you're just going to be on a wild goose chase. Now, there are sometimes, right, go back to the government, there are laws about what you have to collect and what you should retain and what you have to have. Okay, we'll just start. Because the kind of parallel conversation there to what pieces of data are always going to be, okay, how do you need to format that so that you can have value in it? So it becomes standardization. And then that's a whole big fight because there's thousands, tens of thousands of people employed that are adding no value because they get to hem and haw over what data fields should be named. And you're not even like doing anything with the data yet.
You did a lot of the in-between of the problem and then what is the outcome? And then all the things you just described are all of the variations in between to get to hopefully what is that desired outcome. I think the piece I like to highlight from the data literacy perspective is if you can help identify what the problem is and you can identify what they want as an outcome, and the in-between is something that you can systemically go through, right?
Yeah. The data engineers, the data scientists, let them worry about the in-between. I think as I complain about how people get stuck in between, kind of like I just did ranting about it, is if you can identify the problem and you can work with your stakeholder end user to be like, okay, if we could solve this problem, what would you like to see? What would help you make a decision? Do you just want a number? 12. Oh, 12 is good. Great. Do you want a risk score? Do you want to be able to like see how confident you are in that risk score? Do you want to know what the staleness of the data is? Okay, don't worry about any of that. Just if you, in a perfect world, if you could just draw something on a napkin and that's what you wanted to see, because then you can start walking backwards. Like, okay, what do I need to create that visualization? What types of data do I need? What types of analytics do we need to create that visualization? To do those analytics, I need these data elements. Well, how do these data elements come from these different places? So now I need to normalize them so that they can be compared apples to apples. The middle part, there's a bunch of people that can really do that, but we get stuck at the beginning of, oh, this problem's too hard, or I don't have the data, or I have too much data, and the end of not having a discussion of just, hey, what would be helpful? How would you want to see this? Because the bridging of those two, there's whole fields of people that can do that very well.
Yes. I think the piece of planning up front when it comes to the problem, you'll be able to avoid a lot of the pitfalls in between, where if you're going to use some sort of methodology, you're going to gain efficiency about how you're going to acquire the data. Everyone in the in-between has been doing it for a good solid amount of time, however they're going to get it. But where that data may be coming from or what question you're trying to answer, I think those are all good things to try to brainstorm up front as soon as possible before you get to the point of asking all of these data-driven questions to the engineers, or how do you get it from point A to point B? How are you going to transport it? All of those things are things that can happen, and you need to know about them from the literacy perspective, but you don't have to be an expert on them. You just have to be able to actually understand the concepts underneath it.
Yeah, and because if you go through, you've got these outlined here, these data literacy key concepts, and the first one's data governance. But I think that's just building, knowing that you're going to have governance, but you also have to start. Because as you start looking at data governance being that, hey, you need to have availability, usability, integrity, all the ilities, security. Okay, that's great, but a lot of that already exists. You're not going to make a data system from scratch. And if you do, the components that you piece together are probably going to have a lot of these things enforced. And yeah, you have to remember to consider these things, but you've got to start because there's nothing to govern. If you have one citizen, there's no reason to create a Congress. If your whole country is 1,000 people, you don't need 1,000 representatives. You just don't have the scale required to make good decisions about governance until you start doing some work and having some data constituents, some data elements, some real information to kind of worry about. Because if you look at the data mesh, as the data mesh concept evolved, it was really the idea that you had a data lake, data warehouse, data fabric, data lakehouse, whatever you're calling your data storage and use area that you were going to cover it up with governance. And that governance would be like, oh, these are the standards for integrating all the disparate things. These are the standards for how you're going to access. Okay, that's great, but it makes the assumption that there's something underlying it, right? You've started building the house so that the roof of governance could be put on top. You don't try to make a foundation of governance, which a lot of people do, because your foundation's never going to be set. You're never going to have a foundation to start building on because there's always going to be more that you can do and more that you can change. It's building on quicksand. You need to start somewhere a little bit more concrete.
I think the opposite side is finding a partner that's willing to take the risk of movement as the governance is being put into place. While there's plenty of documentation that laws, Congress, other manuals that have been provided, how can you get that happy medium with the leaders and then the folks that are enforcing the governance so you can still get access to the data? Because there might be fences that are there that unless you have all the pertinent accesses, they won't even open you up to seeing the data.
Yeah, I think if you look at Gabriel Nimbus, for example, I think you start with a system that has a few like super users that have access to get to the data that's needed to talk to stakeholders and start making the visualizations. Because as you get buy-in from user communities, they'll come in and know what data they need and they can apply for it. And you can use that to start some of this governance, some of this kind of cell level identity and access management. If we want to have role-based access controls, attribute-based access controls, until you start bringing in, again, your kind of data constituents, you don't know what all these attributes are going to be. If you take this cell of trusted agents, let them get started doing the work and started proof of concept, then the communities can start to emerge. And as the communities emerge, governance will take hold, right? Because people will want to use the data. And hey, what's the process for me to use the data? We can put a process in place to where now there's data stewards and data owners and data product owners and all. You can start to put that together, but you're never going to be able to start with any attributes if you just, hey, everybody do this at once. What's the benefit for me? I think if you can derive it from this kind of super user community to begin with and show the value, I think you'll get more traction.
Key point, I think, is the adoption of data stewards. I think on the leadership side, what would you give as advice for like purposeful investment on data stewards? I have my own opinion. I was just wanting to see what yours was.
Yeah, and it's funny because I haven't seen data stewards pay off yet. So it's become a cool buzzword, but there is a lack of data literacy in the current data stewards. And it's become, and maybe to your question, there isn't enough dedicated emphasis or education in identifying, training, and implementing this kind of data hierarchy chain of command. Because we end up making invalid assumptions. Like my big pet peeve, a lot of this data-centric operation stuff, a lot of these data-centric decisions and everything, the assumption is made by seniors that are making decisions on where money's going to go and stuff that we're not here yet. That this is hard. We need to think about it more. We need to stand up more organizations to admire the problem. We need to build more data platforms. We need to build more APIs. And it's just patently false. They just don't know where the state of the art is. And so you end up re-engineering a whole bunch of stuff, admiring the problem, wasting money for years because people aren't learning by doing. They're learning by Googling and trying to study. And so just the current state of the art is passed them by and you're not adding any value. So then you get these hierarchies of folks in that advisors are maybe academically sound, but not practically sound. And data stewards are more about, we need to lock all this down until we make sure it's safe. We need to lock all this down. We make sure that the data owners need to be able to make decisions on who can see their data. From a government context or even a corporate context, guess what? Your company owns it first. The division in a company, the unit in an organization that produces that it doesn't own it first. The service owns it first. The U.S. government, the company, they own it first. So it's this back and forth of, I don't want to report my hours too granularly on the timesheet because sometimes I take a long lunch. Sorry for you. The company says it's the rule. Yeah, but my manager said it didn't matter. And then you end up with the data ecosystem is going to be the same thing. I don't really want you to be able to see my HTTP details logs because sometimes people make apps that pass sensitive information through as in HTTP details through an API pull that now all of a sudden there's PII and HTTP details and you don't need that information. So we're going to make sure that that's not a data product we're going to share. That doesn't mean the data is not there and it doesn't mean that it's inappropriate. Now you're just not allowing your parents to see your homework. I know I'm going down a rabbit hole, but that's a real world example in HTTP details with, hospitals that do it and personnel organizations that do it. Not because the organization ever approved it, but because app developers can do lazy things. But unless you let them audit it, unless you let people audit it, then you never know what's on the network. So it's this, yes, we can be conspiracy theorists and not allow anyone to see any of the data, but now you're not going to be able to inform decisions. Because ultimately a decision maker is not going to be able to get the information because all the people that work for them are going to be like, oh, they didn't approve that data product to be shared. Hey, 10% of our company earnings are in that data. We can't see that? No. What? That doesn't make any sense.
Unless it has different tags on it, proprietary, whatever it might be.
But that's why you do attribute-based access controls. But if you go there first, you're not going to know what all the attributes are. So people are just going to be like, oh, no thanks. So you have to have a trusted cadre of people to break down the silos, or people are going to naturally silo more than is appropriate.
Yeah. So on the data steward side, my perspective is purposeful investment in the individuals that have the core competency to be able to do the job. So I think of it similar to how any definition for data-centric operations includes data as ammunition. And I don't remember how many units, but every unit I've been in had some sort of armor officer that was in charge of all of our weapons, and the weapons use that ammunition, right? It's a similar concept where if it's purposeful investment and you want to take data seriously and it is part of your ammunition, then you're going to make some sort of role that's going to be identified within the organization, and that key role will be filled with the people that are competent to be able to do it, right? Yes, do you have to grow the talent? Yeah, you need to grow the talent, but you got to start somewhere. And you have to give them the responsibility, the authority, the permissions to be able to go out, evaluate that data, get access to the data. I've had plenty of clients that will tell you can't see the data until we know what the schema looks like. And I have no idea what the schema looks like unless I open it, because I can't get to the center. I can't get to the original database. Right. I can't go into their user interface. I have to get an account that it will take me 60 days to get an account. Just want to sample the data. I'll take the headers, take the columns, I'll take whatever it is. You don't even have to give me whatever it's inside of it. I just need something to start with. But to have that conversation from a data literacy perspective, I think is key with all of our different leaders.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to the technology thing. Guess what? Data standards aren't that hard. Because the first problem is you don't have that much data, and you think you do. Almost everyone out there trying to make a decision on data, you don't have that much data. And you don't have that many different types of data. And you think you don't. So the ability to look at data and say it's HR data, and then you have finance data. Hey, whatever your main HR system is and whatever it calls stuff, guess what? That's now the authoritative way to call it. Your finance, whatever, that's great. That's now the authoritative way. Just start picking and doing. And then as you normalize them, if you have conflicts, guess what? You can make dialects for that. So I can now map them. And so if you're a little bit more technical, right, what you end up doing is whatever you want the authoritative names to be, okay, do schema on write. Bring the data in, parse it, write it to disk so you can use it for analytics in that more authoritative way. But then apply a schema on read for whatever anybody's opinions are or whatever system their expertise is in. That way they can still query and use the data. So you don't have to enforce this hard data standard when you can allow much more accessibility by just saying, hey, we have this standard language, but then here's all the dialects that are authorized. Let people build their own dialects. All these technologies exist, by the way. This is a solved problem. And if you don't think it is, then it is. I don't even need to argue about it. This is a solved problem, right? So it's just understanding schema on read, schema on write. And if you have big data, yes, that'll start to matter because you'll be computationally expensive, which is why then you start doing things authoritatively. Yes, if you need to take a query for the last, year of a data set that has trillions of events, I said trillions with the T, trillions of events, then yes, asking it with the authoritative names with a very, I'll say meticulously crafted, maybe detail-oriented crafted analytic request or query, then yeah, it matters because once you do trillions of requests, then time starts piling up. Just like it's like, hey, don't use Python, use Scala. Okay, there's some nuances to that, but that's where your efficiencies are. But your average user is going to be trying to find the most common shoe size to keep costs down and make sure that you have a size 10 on the shelf because that's common. Okay, great. That's not a hard query and it's not going to require big data and it's not a super complex analytic. So you can support the 80% use case instead of always getting drowned out by the 20% use case.
So you're highlighting a lot of pieces related to data. Let's go a little bit more into the quality of the data and quality of, say, one data stream in comparison to maybe correlating 2 or 3 data streams and making a new data product related to that. Any thoughts on bridging that or different steps as if you're a leader wanting to talk about data, just an acknowledgement of you have organic data.
Yeah. There's a tendency, again, as people think that they have more data than they do, they also think it's going to be more expensive than it is to store data, at least samples of the data. So you'll end up saying, hey, I've got these, we'll just say 3 data sources. I've got 3 data sources that generally do the same thing. Do I need to collect all 3? Well, at first, absolutely. Because how do you know which one is better? Unless you start looking and you can start comparing quality. Because even if all 3 have poor quality, if one of them is better than the other, then it's better. Or maybe all 3 together, when compared, there's some unique identifier, actually have pretty good quality if you have all 3. So you don't know until you start taking a look at what you have and from a holistic perspective. But then the next thing too is, what if you have one that is really good? And then you have one that's mediocre and one that's poor. Again, if you start figuring out the overlaps in those, what you're going to find is it's almost like your cell phone. Your cell phone has multiple ways to track your location. And in a perfect world, it would have your GPS and to a couple of feet and you'd always know where you are. But who's been inside of somebody's brick house and you don't have GPS, or you're inside the mall and you don't have GPS, but somehow there's a little bit bigger blue dot following you around. Or then, hey, I'm somewhere and my phone's been off and I've got a really big blue dot following me around. So it's that best location algorithm. You need the same thing for best data algorithm because it's not necessarily about the data, it's about the question you're trying to answer. And sometimes some data is better than no data. So if I have a GPS fix, great. If I need to go to a Wi-Fi location, great. Tower triangulation, great. I need the same thing with data. Hey, can I tell exactly where this problem is on my network? Can I tell exactly where this soldier is on the battlefield? No, I don't know which host it is on the network, but I know which network segment it's on. Sweet, that just took me from searching the entire world to searching this one building. Oh, no, I don't know exactly where this soldier is, but I know which unit they're in and I know where that unit is, so I can tell you within 100 meters. Great, that still allows me to clear fires from this place 5 kilometers over. So just having information, if we're talking about driving decisions, having something's better than nothing. And then back to the quality, something we never got to in our last job was like, I think in analytics, it'd be great to have a little stoplight chart. Be like, hey, the answer is 3, and our confidence is either green, amber, red, or some percentage. We're this confident in that answer based off the data that we used. Because then sometimes you had perfect data that lent to it. You had high confidence assessments or analytics. Sometimes it's low confidence, but I want to see something because I'd rather have some frame of reference other than oh, sorry, the perfect data source didn't report today, so I got nothing for you. What do you mean you have nothing?
Yep. As far as the quality, at least the advice I give back to folks would be the completeness. And if, say, you gave an example for 1 versus 3 data sets, if the 3 data sets can give you a more complete picture, then that's probably pretty valuable, right? The reliability leads into the confidence level. And then if it's relevant, right? So it may answer certain questions, but it may be missing 1 or 2 attributes. Maybe you have to run an analytic on it to get that newer attribute that might be more relevant to the picture.
Yeah, making that fused data set from one data set. So you make a data product, right? We take a whole bunch of data sets, we make a data product that's more complete. Because at the end of the day, I don't care about a particular data feed or data set. I care about the data products that I can make to inform decision.
Yep. I think the big piece is the provenance and documenting it downstream. So if you're going to make the curated data view of that data set and it's coming from 3 to 5 different types of sources, if you lose any of those sources because they go up or down for whatever reason, or they're no longer going to be retained, right? They're going to age off the system and you only have 3, then you need to have the healthy conversation with that data steward of, hey, we need to replace this data set, find a new way to find this data set, replace it with a new center, or you just pose it back to your leadership and say, hey, the data's gone. We'll no longer have that data set ever. And then maybe they have courses of action, but things that a data steward, I think, should be tracking is all of the data that they have available to them.
Yeah, and I would make the cynical assumption right now that if you're outside of the intelligence community, the data stewards right now are not having any of these conversations. They're probably like, hey, did y'all get the governance done yet? Okay, I don't have to worry about it yet.
There are some organizations that are trying to put the stewards up front, but it is a learning by doing concept as well. And nobody wants to have any single points of failure. So having folks identified, backups identified, usually they have the right expertise as well to show the value of that data. Not just are they approving access to it, but they know the value of it and then who should receive that data.
Yeah, and I get maybe to degeneralize my comment a little bit because that was an overgeneralization. I think that's the Department of Defense, maybe the government. I think commercially I've been really impressed, but on the commercial side, it's a completely different ballgame. Evaluations of people's performance are tied to like real metrics and not reputations, friendships, very qualitative views of performance, where it's very quantitative in the commercial world. Hey, were we succeeding? Were we winning new contracts? Were we getting money? How are the profits? Did we lose employees? Did we gain employees? Did we have a staffing crisis? Could we get the right talent? And you can map all of those things back. And they really want the data to do this because in a competitive culture, being able to make good decisions really helps. In the corporate world, they're way out in front of the government, but they have more motivation to do it. There's no accountability in government that would even help. And you talk accountability, let's do some quantitative analytics on the impact of not passing a budget as a U.S. Congress when it's your main job. But yeah, sorry, I digress.
I think they're all running businesses when you're talking about the industry. So their focus on business intelligence products from this data is a core component because it drives their revenue and their profits. That they have to track that. And that goes into their quantitative metrics on if they're going to do well on their evaluations or not. It's not the same concept in the DoD. They do need to make sure that they are within a current spending plan, that they are efficiently using their resources. But on the revenue side, it's not as tracked closely across all the different domains. It is in, certain domains, but not everywhere. So I would never be thinking on a day-to-day operation whether or not I was getting, the correct cost mechanism behind it. Like, I think on the flip side, if you still adopt some of those principles across the domains and the data steward is pushing that forward of, we need the data. We need data outside of our domain to help give us more enhancements, more enrichments, more attributes for following. It's helpful. It could just be an evolution where It's just a different focus. Like, of course, I think most leaders would like to do more business intelligence products, and they're leaning that way now quite a bit. I think they've been using it more like FinTel or finance.
Yeah, fintech.
Yeah, is the current way they're looking at it. But all of it intertwines together. It's all dependent on each other. It's not just one domain, it's everything.
Sweet. So that we're hammered on the governance and the quality. I think data architecture is next. What do you think about data architecture? You can start this one off.
I don't think it has to be large. When, like in smaller organizations or smaller units at that tactical level are trying to accomplish whatever the question they're trying to answer, right? But fitting into an architecture that exists is probably a key piece, and not trying to reinvent the wheel. If something already exists and there's a larger overarching strategy out there, nesting is the best way to go. But the only way to nest is to read the documentation and adopt it, right?
Yeah.
You can't fight it when it's already up there. You can provide more good ideas, more lessons learned, and that's usually a little bit better received than just fighting it the entire way and pretending that the architecture, like, it's not going to win out from the organizational level all the way down.
Yeah, unless you're a data engineer, I look at the data architecture as a problem you shouldn't really worry about. And I keep looking at it from that Kubernetes lens of, hey, if you want to make an app or an analytic or a UI, I'll define that real quick. So whenever I say application or app, I'm thinking one or more analytics that creates a data product that has a custom user interface. If you're going to do that, you just need a namespace in Kubernetes, build your app with your analytics and whatnot, have a cached version of the database if you need it for user performance or whatever, have that sync with your real data architecture and let a data engineer decide what kind of database that should be in. Sync back more current data that you need to do your analytics and whatnot on, or run a Spark job on down below. Again, data engineers are going to make that decision, but just tell them what data elements you need. And I think that drastically reduces the complexity, because now your data architecture is only whatever you need to drive one particular app or some analytics that you're using in your namespace. And then you're just syncing data back and forth to the data layer, where the data engineers have really prescribed that, hey, you used Postgres to store this in your app, and that worked fine because of the scale and what you were doing in a number of users and the time period. But in real life, we'd want this in Neo4j. So we're going to put this in Neo4j because your Postgres adjacency matrix got it done here, but it's not going to work at scale. Okay, great. App developer doesn't need to worry about that. And the end users only care about the apps, right? The end users don't care about anything under the hood. They care about the visualization that helps them drive decisions and all that stuff. And they just press the I believe button on everything else in the data architecture. And again, if you're using Kubernetes, great. We didn't have Neo4j. We can add that. Yeah. We didn't have Elastic. Let's add it. We didn't have MySQL, Postgres, Redis, Mongo, whatever it is. Add the container.
I think on the architecture side, you're making a point of having a trusted data engineer being able to do it. But as a leader, the investment has to be there for the correct work roles that can actually conform to what the architecture is. And on the flip side of it is, if you are doing something that you want to be fielded within that given architecture, can you, I say, replicate in a closed environment to do other testing that you might need to do that you don't have access to yet? Or maybe you never will. But for the architecture perspective, you need to fit it into something what it can be. But when you call somebody and ask for segregated resources to be able to do the same thing, if you're going to do innovation, you say that, but it's not as though I can go and check out a box and get all the architecture data, all the things I need from an engineering perspective right now.
Yeah, it's a limited resource. It's just like all the memes about, I want an entry-level cyber person that has a CISP, right? That's not a thing. So limited resources right now. And I think, all right, one side, government, you have a lot of people innovating that aren't innovators, so they shouldn't be allocated the resources. They should be given left bounds, and they should get the data operating system that's been designed by the few data engineers you have that are good. Field them this data operating system and let them go to town on building apps for it. Great. They don't need anything other than that. They might think they do. It's not their job. They don't really need to, because the reason they think they do is because they don't know what's under the hood of the data platform. So a lot of folks are like, oh, well, infrastructure is code. I don't think that means what you think it means, right? Or, yeah, but you're using Rancher. You really need to be using Tanzu. I don't think you know what you're talking about. It comes back to, okay, install it as a Helm chart. You'll be great. What that's app level discussions like, oh yeah, but I need a database. If it's a database in your app, all you're doing is full stack web development. Go do some full stack web development. Have a data system that can take your data professionals and they can tune things for you. And I think it's this separation of church and state. Now, in the commercial world, there's plenty of talent. You're just going to have to pay for it. But the technology is very accessible right now. It's not like it was back when we first started playing with it. Like, we can go and we can get Kubernetes running on our machine and we can deploy some things on it. We can secure it enough and we can start dabbling and we can become pretty good contributors very quickly. And there are a lot of companies that have hardened Kubernetes distributions, or you can just go on Amazon or Microsoft and you can spin one up in the cloud for places that actually use the cloud very well and just start using those cloud resources and deploying containers. You've got Amazon managed services and Microsoft managed services for containers in the cloud and scanning registries. There's a lot that's out there. So I think it comes back to a separation on one side of, okay, are you just trying to answer commanders' questions? Then you don't need to design a data platform for that. You need to design the way to answer the question and go ask people that manage data for data instead of just doing your own thing. And then on the other side, I think it's in the commercial world, they have the opportunity to be more cutting edge because they can afford the talent. They can responsibly use some of these commercial resources, different rules and stuff. And they can work on the more long-term ask because the government doesn't do IRAD, not outside of programs of record, right? Or, sorry, the S&T community. Like units that are really what you're poking at here are all the units that are paying for innovation stuff that shouldn't be. Okay, great. If they need to put a tourniquet on something to do it immediately, hey, absolutely. But they don't do IRAD. Companies do IRAD. S&T organizations do research and development. And those folks have a different bar for what they can do. Yeah, go out there, do great things. But focus on your lane. Hey, I want to do the next automated cyber thing. That's awesome. Don't worry about the data. And they're going to be like, what are you talking about? No, we'll need to build a platform and we'll need to do new sensors and no, you don't. Like generally the data elements are all going to be the same. Work with the data we have and try to create that revolution on the front end. Somebody else that wants to do the next gen data platform that can do it better and faster. Sure, do that. But I think you need to segregate the activities a little bit more because right now you look at IRAD stuff. It's we're doing IRAD we'll talk about Chase at DARPA. We're doing IRAD to do cyber hunt and analytics at scale. Okay, that's great. What are you going to focus on? Everything. And then there's no focus on anything.
But it takes them 5 years to do everything.
Yeah, that totally worked out too.
Yeah. I think what I'd like to tell folks related to the architecture is if I'm a senior person that's trying to do the engagements with a different industry and helping to evaluate how do I find the right engineers that are going to help me accomplish my mission, my goal. My focus is it going to be part of those Vaultus goals that are really inherent in sharing the data. So Vaultus, these are the things that you should consider if you're going to talk about doing data and data architecture with the Department of Defense. Is the data going to be visible, accessible, usable, linked, trustworthy, interoperable, and it's secure? And the last two are usually, or the last three are usually the ones we're talking about. So interoperable is always the big piece. Architecture, is it interoperable? Can it be utilized in different types of data formats? Can I use different technologies? You just listed like 10 different types of technologies that have been part of this evolution of the architecture, right? Can it continue to make that evolution? Can you find the right engineers to be on your team to help make that innovation or build on what's already been provided? So the interoperability is really key. And then it's a really large focus on security of the data. And if you have the data and you want to treat it as ammunition, you got to protect it. All bullets must be counted.
Yeah, definitely. I was very verbose back then. I think to distill it, right, is, okay, if you want to go on the application side, regardless of what's below it, you're going to hit an API. And then as soon as I say that, someone's going to be like, well, you're not, what about GraphQL? You're going to hit a form of an API. And kind of that application layer, the API layer, the data layer, the governance, so the security and access management attributes and stuff, all of those can be worked individually. You don't have to always throw out the baby with bathwater and say, we're going to do it all. That's my point there.
Yeah. I just think it's identifying who's in charge of the architecture, what roles, responsibilities, where you as a data steward or whoever is wanting to be educated from the data literacy perspective, where do you fit in that architecture? And then what can you help contribute to it or gain from it in comparison to maybe tackling it? It's your problem when it's really not. Whatever solution you try to make up won't be conformed to anyway. It might be wasted time, wasted effort, wasted talent.
Yeah, and maybe a cautionary tale out there to the government folks. This isn't as applicable in the commercial world, but in the government, just the nature of contracts, the nature of really our credibility and understanding of this domain. There aren't that many subject matter experts. Is you're going to have vendors come to you and tell you you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. No, we have to do it all. We do it special. No. It's like, no, give me a cloud native app. Give me this API. Integrate me a database. Because all I care about is, hey, we're maintaining this hardened Kubernetes. After that, modularly deliver capabilities, but you're going to have a bunch of people come in. No, we're special, the Palantirs of the world, right? No, you're not. You do make pretty user interfaces, and hey, if you want to sell your pretty user interface to put on whatever tech stack, let's do it. But that's not their business model. So you're going to have some folks that come in with a business model that's no, all or nothing. And it just makes it hard to spread the capability across all the stakeholders that should be able to touch it.
Yeah. I guess on the business side, it could be focusing on everything that's full stack, right? Or you focus things on that are modular. And can you make it modular where you can basically help answer any of those RFIs?
Yep. Okay. I think I've been way too long-winded on this. Do you want to talk about the 4 V's of big data?
I think we'll do the 4 V's and then we'll focus in on part 2 of what'll be part of our data literacy.
Okay.
So, key pieces, concept, big data as far as data literacy. So we're talking about volume, velocity, variety, veracity, value. We did talk a little bit.
She added the 5th V.
Did talk about value a little bit earlier, mostly on the quality side. But I think you saw the different themes of what we've been talking about so far, which is big data versus little data, the volume of it. How large of a data set do you need to help answer your question? Do you need to answer your question in near real time, or do you have to answer it in real time? That will go into the next V for the velocity of it. 2 different use cases. You could have static data that you may not ever need to have updated because it's always a good known type of data product. But I think the focus that we've seen across different types of domains have been small data that's coming in very frequently, or I really need to see this type of video data in real time, not near real time, real time. So I need connection to connection, point to point. It's going to be large. I need it to be up all the time, whatever that might look like.
Yep.
That's part of the problem identification is some of these questions like, what's the volume going to be? Give me a sample. What's the velocity going to look like? What do I need to have for technology-wise to support that type of velocity that's going to come in? What's the variety? Am I going to have different PDFs? Am I going to have web pages? Am I going to have something that comes in an Excel spreadsheet, which is Greg's favorite thing?
Is it going to be a CSV that every time it comes, the headers are different and it's supposed to be the same file?
Is it going to be some sort of log format that's going to be easily readable machine to machine in comparison to a human eye? So all of these different varieties, do I need to standardize it into making something, that one single picture that has that key value information? The quality of the data we talked about earlier within the veracity, but then the value is can it help make decisions? So data-centric operations, using data as ammunition to help drive your decisions, like using all these V's. On the literacy side, I think these are the questions you ask up front right after you get to what problem am I trying to solve? What question am I trying to answer? All right. What's the data look like? What are those attributes of the data that are part of those V's?
Yeah, and I want to throw one curveball in just because we're talking about value. And I think value will come back to you can have data in your system, and there's different ways to use these terms, but you can basically have cold, warm, and hot data in your system. And the more value it has, the hotter you want it. But there's some data that you should just collect and make it cold because you don't have a reason for it today. But particularly you're talking cybersecurity, there will be a new exploit that comes out tomorrow, and you're going to find out that the data feed you thought was never relevant is the only way that you'd be able to see if that vulnerability had been exploited when this vulnerability first started a year ago. And if you don't have that data, guess what? You don't have that data. And then someone might have gotten on your network a year ago, and then there's no telling what they've done since then and what vulnerabilities they've exploited. So there is a use case here for less valuable data to be held in perpetuity because cold storage in the cloud is so cheap.
Yep. So I think some of the recommendations I would make is if you use the language for hot, warm, cold, I usually have to explain it at least once each time I do that particular presentation. So hot being readily available at your fingertips. You type in something, you're going to Google search it, and it's going to pop up with some sort of answer, right?
Yep.
The warm data, you can wait a little while to get your answer. You still have access to the data. Typing it in, running an analytic, get some results. Takes a few minutes, a few hours, just depends on how you want to approach it. But then you have an availability of data that's going to be considered cold, which is you might not have it right away, but it's definitely not lost. And it's relatively inexpensive to actually keep it in that type of storage. So there's different methodologies of how to handle that volume. If you really do have a large volume, how can you handle it? And then have it at the right place at the right time for answers.
Yeah, so maybe specifically that hot layer would be like, hey, I'm putting it in Elasticsearch, and somebody can type in and hit enter, wildcard query, whatever, and less than a minute get something back, and probably much less than a minute get something back. Then the next layer would be like, okay, I'm using a Cumulo, the HDFS distribution for cell level security, and I'm using a Cumulo, and I need this data secure, but I need to be able to query it. Those queries, because of the way it goes and the way that's blocked in these cells and going through all the key value pairs, it might take you hours to get a result back, but you can immediately start to query it and start to get results back. Then the other side is, okay, that was my warm. Now I'm down to cold where, okay, I've got it in Glacier storage and Amazon S3. I'm not paying extra so that I can have it out sooner, so I might have to wait up to 24 hours. If it is an emergency, you can pay them and get it a little sooner. But once you get it in 24 hours, then you, depending on the design of your system, you might have to re-ingest it and re-index it, but then you've got it. And the alternative is you let it drop on the floor, you never collect it, and you're never going to get that data back. Just, yeah, and future podcasts to come, but like we have a website client that we don't do their cybersecurity monitoring, that might change. And they got hit by a ransomware attack and no data backups. So whatever's been encrypted and is being ransomed is gone. And that's where you are, and backups are not expensive. So, hey, everybody, do your backup.
It's a plug for architecture.
Yep.
Do a backup.
Sweet. So we've got a bunch more on the list, but I like to hear myself talk, and I went too long. So I apologize for dragging out this episode, but we'll talk more about data if we get the right number of likes, listens, subscribes. Hint, hint. From this one, we'll talk about more data.
Yes.
Anything you want to close out with, Keri?
I think it's really good to have conversations related to data and broadcasting the different terms or language that we can help provide as like lessons learned. Whatever we've done historically, we don't want anyone to have to repeat any of those if we can help it. So providing, hey, these are some of the key things you might want to think of if you're sitting in some sort of meeting dealing with innovation, or you're dealing with a new type of technology. What kind of questions would you normally ask about the technology? How does it work? Where is the data going to be stored? What does the data look like? Can I get a sample of the data? All of these things, like just what are key things to just always have ready to go, almost like it's a standardized cheat sheet or a checklist.
Yeah, and people get emotional We've been in a ton of meetings where somebody's, I think we should do this. And you'll be like, yeah, we've done that before. You might want to consider X, Y, and Z. They're like, no, you didn't do that. Like, this is new. I'm the first person to ever think of it. No, and that was a good thought, but you should move forward and go here. And there's a lot of people that think it's a competition rather than you trying to help someone start on the ladder where you are versus them having to start over. Right?
Yep. Always open to new ideas. It's what keeps innovation moving forward.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And it's funny, right? Because I'm like, you don't want to be a this is the way you've always done it or this is the way we've done it before person. But when it's applicable, sometimes it can save you a lot of time.
Especially if it's already been documented that it didn't work or there's reasons why it didn't work. Maybe the approach could be different. That's why I'm always open to hearing whatever the topic is.
Yeah.
But sometimes you don't want to have someone relive the price you've already paid, whether it's been in your time, effort, funding to go through it.
Funding, yeah.
If it's already not worked the first time and they come back, maybe they have something that's newer, that's a different story. But tested it, and maybe governance didn't allow for certain things to happen, that you can't get away from that no matter what kind of technology you have. If the governance is the governance and that doesn't change, the answer's still going to be no matter how awesome it might be. So sometimes it's not about the tech. Sometimes it's about a different document for standards. Standards. Yes.
All right. Awesome. Hey, thanks for listening, Keri. Thanks for coming back.
Yep.
And we'll finish this topic next time. Until then, keep hustling.
Thanks for listening. Find us on social media at Code of Entry and online at codeofentry.com. Check back for new episodes or join the team by signing up for notifications. Until next time, keep hustling.